Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're taking a different kind of journey. Not one filled with action or drama, but one that moves slowly through the corridors of time. A gentle walk through history, where each story unfolds like a whisper in the dark. So get comfortable, adjust your pillows, and let your mind drift as we explore the lives of those who came before us. Before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through history, consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to know we're connected across different corners of the world, all seeking the same peaceful rest. Now, close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest gently on a distant point. Take a deep breath. And let's begin. Imagine waking up on a cold morning in the year 1325. The first thing you notice isn't the comfort of your bed, because there is none. You're lying on a straw mattress that crackles beneath you, stuffed with hay that was probably taken from the barn floor months ago. The smell is earthy, musty, mixed with the scent of animals because your home is shared with goats, chickens, and the occasional pig that wanders in from outside. There's no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters that don't quite close properly, letting in drafts of freezing air. Your blanket is made of thick wool, unwashed for so long that it's stiff and heavy. You share this single room with your entire family. Parents, siblings, maybe a grandparent in the corner, and everyone's breathing creates a humid fog in the cold morning air. The church bell rings in the distance, a deep, resonant clang that echoes through the village. It's the only clock anyone knows. Time isn't measured in hours and minutes, but in prayers and sunlight. Morning prayer, midday prayer, evening prayer. Your day is structured by the rhythm of the church, whether you're devout or not. You sit up slowly, your joints protesting. You're only in your early 20s, but your body feels decades older. Your back aches from years of bending over in the fields. Your knees crack like dry wood. This is normal. Everyone around you moves the same way, slow and stiff, as if age descends on people by their mid-20s and never lets go. The floor beneath your feet is dirt, packed hard from years of footsteps. It's cold and slightly damp from the rain that leaked through the thatched roof during the night. You stand carefully, trying not to step on anyone else sleeping nearby. Privacy is a concept that doesn't exist here. There are no separate rooms, no doors to close, no moments of solitude. As you move toward the door, you notice the smell. It's everywhere, unavoidable. A mixture of unwashed bodies, animal waste, old food, and smoke from the fire that burns in the center of the room. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, so everything inside is coated in a thin layer of soot. Your clothes, your skin, your hair, everything carries the scent of smoke and sweat. You step outside into the gray morning light. The village is already stirring. Other families are emerging from their huts, coughing, stretching, beginning another day of endless labor. The streets, if you can call them that, are narrow paths of mud and filth. There's no sewage system, no drains. People simply throw their waste out the door or into the street, where it mingles with animal droppings and rainwater. You make your way to the back of your house where a wooden bucket serves as your toilet. It's already half full, used by others in your family during the night. The smell is overpowering, but you've grown used to it. Everyone has. You do your business quickly, then carry the bucket to the street and toss the contents into the communal muck. Someone shouts a warning, "Guardy Lou," but it's more habit than courtesy. No one really moves out of the way anymore. Washing isn't really an option. Water has to be carried from the well at the center of the village, and it's a precious resource. You might splash a little on your face if you're lucky, but a full bath is something that happens maybe once or twice a year, if at all. People believe that bathing opens the pores and lets disease in, so it's actually considered healthier to stay dirty. A layer of grime is seen as protective, a shield against illness. Your teeth ache. They always ache. You've never owned a toothbrush, never heard of one. Some people chew on twigs or rinse their mouths with vinegar, but most just let their teeth rot slowly over the years. By your age, you've already lost a few, and the ones that remain are stained brown and black. Toothaches are a constant companion, a dull throb that sometimes flares into sharp, blinding pain. When it gets bad enough, you'll visit the barber, who'll pull the tooth out with a pair of iron pliers while you bite down on a leather strap and try not to scream. Breakfast is waiting inside, though calling it that feels generous. It's pottage, the same thick, grayish stew you eat almost every day. It's made from whatever vegetables are available, usually turnips, onions, and beans, boiled together in a pot that's been simmering for days. New ingredients are added to the top while the old ones settle at the bottom, creating a layered mixture that tastes vaguely of earth and desperation. Beside the pottage is a hunk of bread, hard as stone, and made from coarse rye flour mixed with whatever else could bulk it up. Sometimes that includes sawdust or ground acorns. The bread isn't sliced. It's more like a weapon. You have to gnaw at it, softening it with your saliva before you can swallow. To drink, there's beer. Weak, watery beer that tastes nothing like what you might imagine. It's low in alcohol, just enough to kill the bacteria in the water it's made from. Everyone drinks it. Children, adults, the elderly. It's safer than water, which is often contaminated with waste and parasites. You sip it slowly, letting the liquid wash down the dry bread, and try to feel grateful that you have anything at all. After breakfast, it's time to get dressed, though that's a generous term for what you do. You own one outfit, maybe two if you're fortunate. It's a rough wool tunic that hangs to your knees, scratchy and uncomfortable against your skin. Underneath, if you're lucky, you have a linen undergarment, but many people go without. The wool is unwashed, saturated with your sweat, and the sweat of whoever wore it before you. It's heavy, stiff, and smells like a wet animal. Your shoes, if you have them, are simple leather slippers with no real sole. They offer little protection against the sharp stones and refuse in the streets. Most days, you just go barefoot, your feet toughened by years of walking on rough ground. In winter, this means frostbite. In summer, it means cuts and infections. But shoes are expensive, a luxury for those with money, and you are not one of them. As you prepare for the day's work, you scratch absent-mindedly at your arm. Fleas, lice, and bed bugs are constant companions. Everyone has them. They live in your clothes, your hair, your mattress. At night, you can feel them crawling across your skin, biting, feeding. You scratch until you bleed, but they always come back. There's no escape. Even the wealthiest nobles have lice. It's just part of life, an itchy, crawling reality that no one talks about because there's no point. Complaining won't make them go away. The sun is rising higher now, and the village is coming to life. You head toward the fields, joining the slow procession of other peasants. The work ahead is brutal. Plowing, planting, weeding, harvesting. It never ends. The land you work doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Lord, a man you've seen only a handful of times, who lives in a stone manor on the hill. You give him most of what you grow, keeping just enough to survive. If the harvest is poor, you starve. If it's good, you still go hungry, just a little less so. The tools you use are simple. A wooden hoe, a sickle with a dull blade, your own 2 hands. There are no machines, no shortcuts. Everything is done by muscle and sweat. You bend over the rows of crops, pulling weeds, your back screaming in protest. The sun beats down, or the rain soaks through your clothes, but you keep working. There's no choice. If you stop, you don't eat. If you don't eat, you die. Hours pass in a haze of monotony and pain. Your hands blister and bleed. Your legs tremble with exhaustion. Around you, others work in silence, too tired to talk. Occasionally, someone collapses, overcome by heat or hunger or sheer fatigue. They're dragged to the shade, given a little water, and then expected to get back to work. There's no sympathy, no rest. The work must be done. Midday comes, and you pause for a brief meal. More pottage, more hard bread, more weak beer. You eat quickly, sitting in the dirt, too tired to care about the flies that buzz around your food. Then it's back to the fields, back to the endless labor that defines your existence. As the afternoon wears on, your mind drifts. You think about your life, about the future, but there's not much to imagine. You'll work these fields until your body gives out. You'll marry someone from the village, probably someone you've known since childhood, not out of love but out of necessity. You'll have children, and they'll work these same fields. And one day, you'll die, probably young, probably in pain, and be buried in the churchyard with a wooden marker that will rot away within a few years. This is life in the Middle Ages. No grand adventures, no noble quests. Just survival, day after day, until you can't survive anymore. Winter arrives like a slow suffocation. The cold creeps into every corner of your small hut, settling into the walls, the floor, your very bones. There's no insulation, no central heating, just a small fire in the center of the room that you feed with whatever wood you can find. But wood is expensive, and gathering it from the forest can get you arrested or worse. The forests belong to the Lord, and taking even a fallen branch without permission is considered theft. So the fire is small, barely enough to warm your hands. The smoke curls upward toward the hole in the roof, but much of it lingers inside, stinging your eyes and coating your lungs. You cough constantly during the winter months, a wet, rattling cough that everyone shares. Respiratory illnesses sweep through the village regularly, claiming the very young and the very old. You huddle near the fire with your family, wrapped in your damp wool blanket. Your feet are numb, your fingers stiff and clumsy. Chilblains develop on your toes, painful swellings that itch and burn. Frostbite is common, and every winter, someone in the village loses a finger or a toe to the cold. You wiggle your toes inside your threadbare shoes, trying to keep the blood flowing, hoping you'll make it through another season intact. The days are short, the sun weak and pale. Work continues though, even in the freezing temperatures. Fields need to be prepared for spring. Animals need to be tended. Repairs need to be made. You trudge through the snow and mud, your breath visible in the cold air, your body shivering uncontrollably. There's no warm place to retreat to, no cozy hearth waiting at the end of the day. Just the same cold hut, the same smoky fire, the same struggle to stay warm. Food becomes even scarcer in winter. The harvest is long past, and what was stored is running low. Grains are rationed carefully, stretched as far as possible. Meat is a distant memory, reserved for feast days and the tables of the wealthy. You eat thin soups, roots pulled from the frozen ground, anything to fill the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. Hunger is a constant presence, not the sharp pang of missing a meal, but a deep, aching hollowness that never quite goes away. It makes you weak, slow, prone to illness. People waste away during the winter, their bodies consuming themselves in the absence of adequate food. Children suffer most, their growth stunted, their bodies frail. Many don't survive to see spring. And then, just when you think you can't endure any more, winter begins to loosen its grip. The days grow longer, the sun warmer. The snow melts into muddy slush, and tiny green shoots appear in the fields. Spring is coming, and with it, the hope of food, of warmth, of surviving another year. But spring brings its own challenges. The fields, now thawed, become muddy quagmires that suck at your feet and make every step exhausting. Planting must begin immediately, seeds carefully placed in the wet earth, prayers whispered for a good growing season. This is the most crucial time of year. Plant too early, and a late frost will kill everything. Plant too late, and the harvest will be poor. You work from dawn until dusk, your hands caked in mud, your back bent over the furrows. The sun, now stronger, beats down on you, and you go from freezing to overheating in the span of a few weeks. There's no relief, no balance. The weather is either too cold or too hot, too wet or too dry. You're always uncomfortable, always struggling. Summer arrives with a vengeance. The heat is oppressive, turning your hut into an oven. The air inside is thick and stifling, smelling of sweat and animals and rotting straw. Flies swarm everywhere, attracted by the waste and the unwashed bodies. They buzz around your face, land in your food, crawl across your skin. Mosquitoes come out at dusk, biting exposed flesh, leaving itchy welts that you scratch raw. You sweat through your clothes, the wool clinging to your skin, chafing and irritating. But you can't remove it. Modesty demands you stay covered, and besides, the sun will burn any exposed skin within hours. You've seen people with terrible sunburns, their skin blistered and peeling, unable to work for days. So you suffer in your heavy, hot clothes, dreaming of a cool breeze that never comes. The work is relentless. Weeding, watering, tending the crops. The growing season is short, and every day counts. You watch the sky anxiously, praying for rain, but not too much. Too little, and the crops wither and die. Too much, and they rot in the fields. It's a constant gamble, your life hanging in the balance of weather patterns you can't control or predict. As summer fades into autumn, the pace of work intensifies. Harvest time is here, the most critical period of the year. Every able-bodied person in the village is in the fields, cutting grain, gathering vegetables, working frantically to bring in the crop before the first frost. You work until your hands bleed, until you can barely stand, because this harvest will determine whether you live or die in the coming year. The Lord's share is taken first, of course. His steward oversees the division, ensuring the manor gets its due. What's left is divided among the peasants, and it's never enough. You store what you can in your hut, in clay pots and wooden barrels, trying to protect it from rats and moisture and mold. This food must last until next harvest, nearly a year away. The cycle continues, season after season, year after year. There's no escape, no way to break free. You're bound to this land, to this life, by laws and customs older than memory. Serfs like you aren't allowed to leave without the Lord's permission, and that permission is rarely granted. You're tied to the soil as surely as the crops you plant. And so you endure, through freezing winters and scorching summers, through hunger and illness and back-breaking labor. You endure because there's no other choice. This is your life, and it will be until the day you die. Water, the source of all life, becomes a daily gamble in the medieval world. The stream that runs through your village looks clear and inviting, sparkling in the sunlight as it flows over smooth stones. But you know better than to trust appearances. Upstream, the tanner dumps his waste, the butcher rinses his tools, and families dispose of their refuse. The water you see is contaminated with things you'd rather not think about. Drinking straight from the stream is a risk few are willing to take. Those who do often fall ill with stomach ailments that leave them weak and dehydrated, sometimes fatally so. Children are particularly vulnerable, their small bodies unable to fight off the parasites and bacteria that thrive in untreated water. This is why beer is the drink of choice for everyone, from infants to the elderly. The brewing process involves boiling water, which kills most of the harmful organisms. The resulting beverage is weak, barely alcoholic, more like liquid bread than what we'd recognize as beer today. It's nutritious, relatively safe, and available year-round. You drink it with every meal, sometimes between meals, keeping a constant, mild buzz that helps dull the aches and pains of daily life. Wine is reserved for those with means, imported from regions with proper vineyards, stored in barrels in cool cellars. The Lord drinks wine, the priest drinks wine, but you drink your small beer and are grateful for it. Bathing is another matter entirely. The idea of immersing yourself in water is met with suspicion and fear. Medical wisdom of the time holds that bathing opens your pores, making you vulnerable to disease and bad air. It's believed that the layer of dirt and oil on your skin actually protects you, a barrier against illness. Public bathhouses exist in larger towns, but they've gained unsavory reputations. They're places where people go not just to bathe, but to socialize, gossip, and engage in activities the church frowns upon. The clergy preaches against them, warning that they're dens of sin and corruption. Many have been shut down, leaving even fewer options for those who might want to clean themselves. So you remain unwashed, weeks turning into months, months into years. Your hair becomes matted and greasy, a breeding ground for lice. Your skin develops sores and rashes, irritated by the constant friction of dirty clothes. The smell is overwhelming, but it's universal. Everyone stinks, so no one notices anymore. When illness strikes, and it will, you have few options. Medicine in the Middle Ages is a blend of folklore, religion, and outdated Greek theories. Physicians are rare and expensive, available only to the wealthy. For common people like you, healing comes from the village wise woman or the local barber. The prevailing medical theory revolves around the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is believed to be a balance of these fluids, and illness a sign that they're out of alignment. Treatments are designed to restore balance, often through dramatic and dangerous means. Got a fever? You have too much blood. The cure is bloodletting, the deliberate draining of blood from your body. The barber makes a small incision in your arm or applies leeches that attach themselves to your skin and suck. You watch your blood drip into a bowl, feeling weaker by the moment, assured that this is helping even as your head spins and your vision blurs. Feeling melancholic? That's an excess of black bile. You'll be given a purgative, a mixture of herbs designed to make you vomit or evacuate your bowels violently. The theory is that you're expelling the bad humors, but mostly you're just becoming dangerously dehydrated. If you break a bone or suffer a wound, you're in even greater danger. There's no understanding of infection, no concept of germs. Tools aren't sterilized. They're simply wiped clean and used again. Surgery is performed without anesthesia, the patient held down by strong men while the barber surgeon cuts and saws and stitches. Many die from shock or blood loss. Many more die days later when the wounds become infected, fever setting in, the flesh turning red and hot and swollen. Prayer is often considered the most effective treatment. Illness is seen as punishment for sin or a test from God. The priest comes to your bedside, offering last rites if you're lucky, praying for your soul rather than your body. Pilgrimages to holy sites are recommended for chronic conditions. If you can walk, you travel to a shrine, hoping for a miracle. If you can't, you simply suffer and wait. Some treatments border on the absurd. Ground up beetles for stomach aches. Powdered gemstones for fever. A poultice made from bread mold, which, unknowingly, might actually help due to natural antibiotics. Most remedies do nothing, some make things worse, and a few, purely by accident, provide relief. You live with pain as a constant companion. That toothache that started months ago has become unbearable, radiating through your jaw and up into your skull. You finally go to the barber, who sits you down and examines the tooth by candlelight. He nods, retrieves his pliers, and tells you to bite down on a leather strap. There's no numbing, no preparation. He grips the tooth and pulls, twisting and wrenching. The pain is blinding, white-hot, absolute. You scream into the leather, tears streaming down your face, until finally, mercifully, the tooth comes free, taking a piece of your gum with it. Blood fills your mouth, and you're told to rinse with salt water and pray it doesn't become infected. But infection is always a risk. A small cut on your hand, ignored at first, begins to throb. The skin around it turns red, then purple. Pus forms, and fever sets in. You're weak, shaking, unable to work. The wise woman comes, lances the wound to drain it, and applies a poultice of herbs. You might recover, or you might not. Many people die from infections we treat today with a simple antibiotic. The truly horrifying diseases, though, are the epidemics that sweep through periodically. Plague, smallpox, typhus. They arrive without warning, spread rapidly through the crowded, unsanitary villages, and kill indiscriminately. You watch your neighbors fall ill, their bodies covered in sores, burning with fever, delirious with pain. Entire families are wiped out in days. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. There's no understanding of how disease spreads, no concept of quarantine or hygiene. People huddle together for comfort, accelerating the transmission. They blame bad air, divine wrath, evil spirits, sometimes the local Jews or outsiders, leading to violence and scapegoating. If plague comes to your village, there's little you can do but pray and hope you're spared. Some flee to the countryside, but often they just carry the disease with them. Others seal themselves in their homes, only to succumb to starvation or madness. The death toll can reach 50% or more, leaving the survivors traumatized and the village devastated. Through all of this, you learn to accept suffering as inevitable. Pain, illness, death, they're woven into the fabric of daily life. You don't expect to live long, don't expect to be healthy. You simply endure, day by day, hoping that today isn't the day the pain becomes too much to bear. Food, the most basic necessity, is also one of your greatest daily challenges. What you eat is determined entirely by season, availability, and social class. Variety is a luxury you'll never know. Meat is rare, reserved for feast days and the tables of nobility. For most of the year, you subsist on grains, vegetables, and whatever you can forage from the woods. Your diet is monotonous to the point of despair. Pottage appears at every meal, a thick stew of grains and vegetables that simmers endlessly in a pot over the fire. Oats, barley, turnips, onions, peas if you're fortunate. The pot is never fully emptied, new ingredients added to what remains, creating a perpetual mixture that tastes of earth and subsistence. Bread is the other staple, but it bears little resemblance to what we know today. Wheat is expensive, reserved for the wealthy, so your bread is made from rye or barley, often mixed with less appetizing ingredients to stretch the flour. Ground acorns, peas, even sawdust might find their way into the dough. The result is dense, dark, and hard enough to break teeth. You tear at the bread with your remaining teeth, softening it in your mouth before swallowing. Sometimes you dip it in your pottage to make it more palatable. It fills your stomach but provides little satisfaction. There's no joy in eating, just the necessity of fuel to keep working. Vegetables come from your small plot of land, if you're allowed one, or from common areas. Root vegetables store well, so you eat a lot of turnips, parsnips, carrots, cabbage, onions, and leeks add flavor to your pottage. In summer, you might have access to fresh greens, a brief respite from the monotony, but they don't last. Preservation is difficult without refrigeration, so you eat what's in season or what's been dried, salted, or stored in root cellars. Fruit is a rare treat, available only during harvest season. Apples, pears, berries, all consumed fresh because they spoil quickly. The wealthy preserve fruit in honey or make it into wine, but you eat it immediately, savoring the sweetness while it lasts. More often, fruit is fermented into alcohol, extending its usefulness and providing another source of drink safer than water. Dairy is slightly more common than meat, but still not an everyday occurrence. If your Lord allows you to keep a goat or a cow, you might have milk, though it sours quickly in warm weather. Cheese and butter last longer, and are valued accordingly. You use them sparingly, a small amount adding flavor to your otherwise bland meals. Meat is the ultimate luxury. The animals you tend, the pigs and chickens, belong to the Lord. Slaughtering one without permission is theft, punishable by fine, imprisonment, or worse. A few times a year, on feast days or after the harvest, meat might be distributed. You'll have a small portion of pork or chicken, and you savor every bite, knowing it'll be months before you taste it again. Hunting is forbidden to peasants. The forests, the deer, the rabbits, they all belong to the nobility. Poaching, even to feed your starving family, can result in brutal punishment. Men have been hanged for killing the Lord's deer, their bodies left to rot as a warning to others. So you watch the game animals from a distance, your mouth watering, but your hands stayed by fear. Fish is somewhat more accessible if you live near a river or the sea. On days designated as fast days by the church, meat is forbidden, and fish becomes the acceptable alternative. But even fish costs money, and the fresher it is, the more expensive. You might occasionally afford dried or salted fish, preserved for transport, tough and salty but edible. Salt itself is precious, used sparingly to preserve what little food you have. It's expensive, sometimes locked away, and its absence makes food even blander. Without proper preservation, food spoils quickly. You eat moldy bread, rotten vegetables, fermented grains, because throwing food away isn't an option. You pick off the worst parts and consume the rest, hoping it won't make you sick. Food safety is a constant concern. Without refrigeration or proper storage, parasites and bacteria thrive. Grain becomes infested with weevils and insects. You find them in your flour, in your bread, and you eat them anyway because you have no choice. Protein is protein, even if it crunches. Ergot, a fungus that grows on rye, is particularly dangerous. It causes hallucinations, convulsions, gangrene. Entire villages have been afflicted with ergot poisoning, people writhing in agony, seeing visions, losing fingers and toes to blackened flesh. But identifying it is difficult, and hunger overrides caution. You eat the bread and hope for the best. The church dictates much of what and when you eat. Fast days are numerous, requiring abstinence from meat and sometimes dairy. Lent, the period before Easter, is 40 days of restricted eating. You're already malnourished, but you follow the rules because to do otherwise is sin. The wealthy find loopholes, expensive spices, and imported delicacies that technically comply while providing variety and flavor. You have no such options. Spices are impossibly expensive, worth more than gold by weight. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these are symbols of wealth and status. A noble might flavor his food with exotic spices to demonstrate his riches. You've never tasted them, never even seen them. Your food is seasoned with what you can grow or find. Onions, garlic if you're lucky, wild herbs from the forest. Hunger is always present, a gnawing emptiness that never quite leaves. Even after eating, you're not satisfied, just less desperately hungry. Your body craves nutrients it's not getting, calories it needs for the hard labor you perform. You're perpetually tired, weak, prone to illness because your immune system is compromised by malnutrition. Children suffer most visibly. Stunted growth, distended bellies, thin limbs. They cry from hunger, and there's nothing you can give them. Infant mortality is high, many babies dying before their first birthday from malnutrition or disease. Those who survive grow up small and weak, their bodies bearing the permanent marks of childhood deprivation. Yet somehow you survive. Your body adapts to functioning on minimal calories, conserving energy, slowing down. You learn to ignore the hunger, to push through the weakness. Survival becomes its own skill, one you master through necessity. Food isn't pleasure or comfort. It's fuel, barely adequate but just enough to keep you alive another day. The church is not merely a building in the center of your village. It is the center of your entire existence. Its stone walls rise higher than any other structure, its bell tower visible from the fields where you labor. The bell that rings from that tower dictates the rhythm of your day, your week, your year, your entire life. You wake to the sound of the morning bell, calling the faithful to prayer. You pause your work at midday when it rings again. Evening prayers are announced by the same sonorous clang, and Compline, the final prayer of the day, signals the time to sleep. The bell marks deaths, births, warnings of danger, celebrations of feast days. It is the voice of God reaching down to your small, insignificant world. Sunday is the Lord's Day, and attendance at Mass is not optional. Skipping church is a sin that will be noticed and reported. Your neighbors watch, the priest watches, and missing Mass could result in penance, public shaming, or worse. So every Sunday, no matter how tired, how sick, how desperate to rest, you drag yourself to the church. The service is conducted entirely in Latin, a language you don't understand. The priest intones prayers and scripture in words that mean nothing to you, his back to the congregation, facing the altar. You stand for hours. There are no pews for peasants, only for the nobility. Your legs ache, your stomach growls, but you remain silent and still, because to do otherwise would be disrespectful to God. You can't read the Bible yourself. Books are rare and expensive, available only to the wealthy and the clergy. Even if you had access to one, you can't read. Literacy is reserved for priests, monks, and nobles. So you depend entirely on the church to tell you what God wants, what pleases him, what angers him. The priest is the intermediary between you and the divine, and his word is law. The church teaches that your suffering in this life is a test, a preparation for the next. If you endure poverty, pain, and hardship with patience and faith, you'll be rewarded in heaven. The nobility, the wealthy, they're also being tested, but in different ways. Their wealth is a burden they must bear, their power a responsibility. Everyone has their place in God's order, and to question that order is to question God Himself. This message is reinforced constantly. The meek shall inherit the earth, but not this earth, not in this lifetime. Blessed are the poor, the hungry, the persecuted, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven, eventually, after death. Until then, you work, you obey, you suffer, and you trust that it all has meaning. Tithes are mandatory, a tenth of everything you produce. Grain, vegetables, animals, even your labor if you have nothing else. The church collects these tithes rigorously, and failure to pay is met with severe consequences. Excommunication is threatened, a terrifying prospect because it means not only social exclusion, but eternal damnation. You give what little you have, even when it means you'll go hungry, because the alternative is too horrifying to contemplate. The church is also the only source of social services. It runs hospitals for the sick, though. Hospital is a generous term for what are often just rooms where the dying are placed to await their end. Monasteries provide charity, distributing bread to the desperately poor, though never enough. Priests perform marriages, baptisms, funerals, marking the significant moments of life with ritual and sacrament. Saints and their relics are objects of intense devotion. Every church has relics, fragments of bone or cloth believed to have belonged to saints, objects of miraculous power. People travel long distances to see and touch these relics, believing they can cure illness, grant fertility, protect from harm. You've made such pilgrimages yourself, walking for days to reach a shrine, hoping for relief from your constant ailments. The concept of purgatory looms large in your understanding of death. It's taught that most souls don't go directly to heaven or hell but to purgatory, a place of purification where sins are burned away through suffering. The duration of time in purgatory can be reduced through prayers, masses, and indulgences purchased from the church. Families save what little money they have to pay for masses to be said for their dead, hoping to ease their suffering in the afterlife. Hell is described in vivid, terrifying detail. Lakes of fire, eternal torment, demons with pitchforks, bodies burned but never consumed, screaming in agony forever. The priest paints these images with relish, ensuring that fear of damnation keeps you compliant. Every sin, from missing Mass to lustful thoughts, is another step toward that eternal horror. Confession is required at least once a year, often more. You kneel in the dim church, whispering your sins to the priest through a wooden screen. He assigns penance, prayers to recite, fasts to observe, sometimes public acts of contrition. Your sins, even the private ones, become known to the clergy, giving them power over you, knowledge they can use to control and manipulate. The church also controls marriage. Weddings are performed by priests, and marriages not sanctioned by the church are considered invalid. The church dictates who can marry whom, forbidding unions between relatives, requiring permission for marriages across social classes. Divorce doesn't exist, Marriage is a sacrament, permanent and unbreakable except in rare cases of annulment, which require wealth and influence to obtain. Women are taught that they are inherently sinful, descendants of Eve who brought sin into the world. They must be obedient to their husbands, silent in church, covered and modest at all times. The ideal woman is the Virgin Mary, pure, submissive, devoted. Any deviation from this ideal is dangerous, potentially evidence of witchcraft or demonic influence. Fear of witchcraft is pervasive. Women who are too independent, too knowledgeable about herbs and healing, too outspoken, are viewed with suspicion. Accusations of witchcraft can arise from personal disputes, jealousy, or simple misfortune. A cow dies, a crop fails, a child falls ill, and someone must be blamed. Often, it's a woman on the margins of society, someone vulnerable and easy to accuse. Trials for witchcraft are nightmarish. The accused is subjected to ordeals designed to prove guilt or innocence through divine intervention. She might be bound and thrown into water. If she floats, she's guilty because the water rejects her. If she sinks and drowns, she was innocent, though that's small comfort to her corpse. She might be forced to carry hot iron or plunge her hand into boiling water. If the wounds fester, she's guilty. The system is designed to produce confessions and convictions, not justice. The Church's power extends into every aspect of life. It determines holidays, controls education, influences laws, owns vast amounts of land. Monasteries and convents are economic powerhouses, producing goods, collecting rents, wielding influence that rivals nobility. To oppose the Church is to oppose God, an act of heresy punishable by excommunication, imprisonment, torture, or death. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, this overwhelming power, faith provides comfort. In a world of suffering and uncertainty, the promise of heaven offers hope. The rituals, the prayers, the communal worship, they create a sense of belonging, of purpose. You may not understand the Latin, but the familiarity of the service, the rhythm of the liturgical year, provides structure to your chaotic existence. You pray daily, asking for strength, for health, for enough food to survive. You pray to saints, each with their own specialties. Saint Anthony for lost items, Saint Blaise for throat ailments, Saint Sebastian for protection from plague. These saints feel closer than the distant, incomprehensible God, more accessible, more likely to listen to someone as lowly as you. And so the Church weaves itself into every moment of your life, from the bell that wakes you to the prayers muttered before sleep. It offers salvation and threatens damnation, provides charity and demands tribute, brings comfort and instills fear. You can't imagine life without it, can't conceive of a world where the Church doesn't reign supreme. It simply is, as permanent and unchangeable as the sky above. If being a peasant in medieval Europe is hard, being a woman is exponentially harder. From the moment of birth, your value is measured differently, your opportunities limited by your sex in ways that permeate every aspect of existence. As a girl, you receive little to no education. Reading and writing are skills reserved for boys destined for the church or nobility. Your education consists of learning domestic tasks, spinning, weaving, cooking, cleaning, tending animals, managing a household. These are taught by your mother and older women, passed down through observation and repetition. Marriage is your expected destiny, the only real path available. You're betrothed young, often in your early teens, to a boy chosen by your father or the local lord. Love is irrelevant. Marriage is a practical arrangement, an economic transaction. Your husband gains a worker, a bearer of children, a manager of his home. You gain protection, status, a defined role in society. The wedding itself is simple if you're a peasant. A ceremony at the church, vows exchanged before a priest, perhaps a small celebration if your families can afford it. Then you move into your husband's home, or more accurately, into his family's home, because private residences for young couples are rare. Your husband has complete authority over you. He controls any property you brought to the marriage, makes all decisions, can discipline you physically if he feels it's warranted. The church and society support this hierarchy. Women are taught to be obedient, submissive, to accept their husband's judgment without question. Your primary duty is to bear children, preferably sons. Pregnancy comes quickly and repeatedly. There's no reliable birth control, no understanding of family planning. You're pregnant, nursing, or recovering from childbirth for most of your adult life. Each pregnancy is dangerous, potentially fatal. Complications are common, medical help limited, death a very real possibility. Labor is agonizing and terrifying. You deliver at home, attended by a midwife and female relatives. There's no pain relief, no medical intervention available. You squat or lie on a birthing stool, pushing for hours, sometimes days, while the midwife encourages and prays. Hemorrhaging, obstructed labor, infection, these are constant risks. Many women die in childbirth, and even more lose their babies. If you survive delivery, the recovery is brief. Within days, you're expected to resume your duties, caring for the newborn while also maintaining the household, working in the fields, tending animals. There's no maternity leave, no period of rest. Motherhood is added to your existing responsibilities, not a replacement for them. Infant mortality is heartbreakingly high. You might give birth to 10 children and watch half of them die before age 5. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, they claim young lives with terrifying regularity. You grieve each loss, but you also grow numb to it, hardened by necessity. You can't afford to fall apart. There are surviving children to care for, work to be done. Your status as a woman makes you vulnerable in other ways. If your husband dies, you become a widow, a precarious position. You might be allowed to remain on the land, or you might be evicted, forced to rely on charity or remarry quickly to survive. Widows are often targets of suspicion, blamed for their husband's death, accused of failing in their wifely duties. If you remain unmarried, you're an anomaly, viewed with suspicion. Why hasn't a man claimed you? Are you cursed? Barren? Unmarried women have few options. Live as a dependent in a relative's home, enter a convent if you have a dowry, or exist on the margins of society, vulnerable to poverty and accusation. Accusations of witchcraft disproportionately target women, especially those who don't fit neatly into expected roles. Healers, midwives, women who live alone, those who are outspoken or quarrelsome, all are potential targets. The logic is circular and damning. If misfortune occurs near you, you caused it through witchcraft. If you deny it, you're lying. If you confess under torture, you're guilty. The trials are designed to break you. Torture is applied until you confess to whatever you're accused of. Sleep deprivation, thumbscrews, the rack, waterboarding, methods refined to inflict maximum pain while keeping you alive to confess. Once you confess, the outcome is predetermined. Execution, usually by burning, occasionally by drowning. Even in less extreme circumstances, violence against women is normalized. Domestic abuse is considered a private matter, a husband's right to discipline his wife. The church teaches that women are morally weak, prone to sin, in need of male guidance and correction. Physical punishment is seen as appropriate, even necessary, to keep women in line. Your voice is systematically silenced. In church, you're forbidden to speak during services. In legal matters, your testimony is worth less than a man's. In marriage, your husband speaks for you. In society, your opinions are dismissed, your intellect questioned, your contributions minimized. Yet women find ways to exert influence, to carve out spaces of power within the constraints. In the home, you manage resources, make daily decisions, teach children. Some women become skilled in crafts, brewing, weaving, producing goods that bring income. Widows sometimes run businesses, manage estates, particularly if they have no adult sons to take over. Noble women have more opportunities, though still limited by gender. They manage castles while their husbands are at war, negotiate marriages, sponsor religious institutions. A few, through intelligence and circumstance, wield significant political power, though always subject to challenge and criticism in ways men never face. For most women, though, life is an endless cycle of work and childbirth, bounded by limitations imposed simply because of sex. You endure because there's no choice, finding moments of joy in children, in female friendships, in small acts of defiance that go unnoticed by the men who control your world. Violence in medieval society isn't an aberration. It's woven into the very fabric of daily life. Justice is swift, brutal, and public, designed more to terrorize than to rehabilitate or protect. Crime is common because poverty is common. Desperate people steal food, poach game, take what they need to survive. The punishments for these crimes are disproportionately harsh, designed to deter through fear. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might lose a hand. Poach a rabbit from the Lord's forest, and you could be hanged. Public executions are entertainment, drawing crowds from miles around. The gallows stand in the town square, a permanent reminder of the cost of transgression. When someone is to be hanged, people gather early to get a good view, bringing food and drink, treating it like a festival. The condemned is brought out, often after days of torture and imprisonment, weak and terrified. A rope is placed around their neck, and they're pushed off a platform or a cart is driven away, leaving them to dangle and strangle slowly. Death isn't instantaneous. The condemned struggles, gasping for air, their face turning purple, legs kicking. The crowd watches with a mixture of horror and fascination. Some pray, some jeer, some simply stare. The body is left hanging as a warning, sometimes for days, until it's cut down and buried in an unmarked grave or left for animals. Beheading is reserved for the nobility, considered a more honorable death. It requires an executioner skilled with an axe or sword, someone who can sever the head in 1 or 2 blows. It doesn't always go smoothly. Axes miss or don't cut cleanly, requiring multiple strikes while the victim writhes in agony. The head is then displayed on a spike, placed on city gates or bridges, left to rot as a warning to others. Burning is the punishment for heretics and witches, considered both execution and purification. The accused is tied to a stake surrounded by bundles of wood. The fire is lit, and the flames slowly consume them. If they're fortunate, smoke inhalation kills them before the flames reach their body. If not, they're roasted alive, screaming until their lungs are too damaged to produce sound. The smell of burning flesh lingers for days. These executions serve multiple purposes. They punish the guilty, deter potential criminals, and reinforce the power structure. The Lord, the Church, the law, they all demonstrate their authority through violence, showing what happens to those who step out of line. But violence isn't limited to official punishment. Personal disputes often escalate to physical confrontation. Men carry knives, and arguments in taverns regularly end in bloodshed. Honor is valued above almost everything, and insults demand response. A perceived slight to your reputation can lead to duels, brawls, even murders. The legal system offers little protection. There's no police force, no detectives investigating crimes. Justice is administered by the Lord or his appointed officials, and it's arbitrary. If you're accused, your ability to defend yourself depends on your status and wealth. Peasants have little recourse. Nobles can often buy their way out of consequences. Trial by ordeal is still practiced in many places, based on the belief that God will protect the innocent. The accused might be forced to carry hot iron, walk across burning coals, or plunge their hand into boiling water. The wounds are bandaged, and after 3 days, they're examined. If they're healing cleanly, the person is innocent. If they show signs of infection, guilt is proven. It's a system that guarantees few acquittals. Trial by combat is another option, particularly for disputes between nobles. The accused and accuser fight, sometimes to the death, with the belief that God will grant victory to the righteous. This means that physical strength and fighting skill determine justice, not evidence or truth. Women accused of crimes, particularly sexual transgressions or witchcraft, face specialized punishments designed to humiliate as well as hurt. The scold's bridle, a metal cage placed over the head with a piece that goes into the mouth, is used on women deemed too talkative or argumentative. They're paraded through the streets, unable to speak, subjected to public mockery. Domestic violence is endemic and largely ignored. A man beating his wife is seen as exercising his rightful authority. Neighbors might hear the screams, but won't intervene. It's not their business. Women have no legal recourse, no shelters to flee to, no protection. They endure or die. Those are the options. War is the backdrop to everything, a constant threat. Local lords feud over land and insults, raising armies from their peasant populations. You might be conscripted, forced to leave your fields and fight in a conflict you don't understand, armed with a spear or pike, given minimal training, and marched into battle. Medieval warfare is chaotic and brutal. Armies clash in fields, men hacking at each other with swords and axes, horses trampling the fallen, screams and blood everywhere. There's no glory, just terror and pain. If you're lucky, you're killed quickly. If not, you're wounded and left to die slowly on the battlefield, or captured and held for ransom if you're valuable, killed if you're not. Siege warfare is even worse. Armies surround castles or towns, cutting off supplies, waiting for starvation to force surrender. Inside, people eat their animals, then their shoes, then anything remotely edible. Disease spreads in the confined, unsanitary conditions. When the walls are finally breached, the invading army often massacres the defenders and pillages the town, raping and murdering civilians in an orgy of violence. Through all this, you learn that life is cheap, violence is normal, and safety is an illusion. You keep your head down, obey those in power, and hope that you're not the next example made on the gallows, or the next casualty of a lord's ambition. Death is not a distant possibility in medieval life. It's an ever-present companion, hovering at the edge of every moment. Infant mortality is staggering. Nearly half of all children dying before they reach their 5th birthday. Mothers give birth knowing there's a significant chance they won't survive the experience, and that even if they do, the baby might not. The diseases of childhood are relentless killers. Measles, whooping cough, scarlet fever, diphtheria, they sweep through villages regularly, claiming the youngest and weakest. There are no vaccines, no antibiotics, no treatments beyond prayer and hope. Parents watch helplessly as their children burn with fever, struggle to breathe, waste away. The small bodies are wrapped in cloth and buried in the churchyard, often in graves so shallow that animals sometimes unearth them. If you survive childhood, you've cleared a major hurdle, but danger doesn't diminish. Accidents are common and frequently fatal. Falls from roofs or ladders, injuries from farm equipment, kicks from horses or oxen, all can lead to death when infection sets in. A broken bone that doesn't heal properly can leave you crippled, unable to work, a burden on your family. For women, childbirth remains the greatest threat throughout their reproductive years. Each pregnancy is a roll of the dice. Hemorrhaging, obstructed labor, puerperal fever, preeclampsia, conditions we can manage today were death sentences then. Young women marry and begin bearing children, knowing that this duty expected of them might very well kill them. Many don't live to see their 30th birthday. Men face their own unique dangers. If you're not killed in war or by violence, work will slowly destroy your body. The constant physical labor, the malnutrition, the exposure to elements, they accumulate damage. Your joints wear out, your back gives out, your lungs fill with damage from breathing smoke and dust for decades. By 40, if you're still alive, you're old, used up, ready for the grave. Famine is a recurring nightmare. When crops fail due to weather, disease, or war, starvation follows. It's not a quick death. It's slow, agonizing, watching yourself waste away. Your body consumes its own muscle and fat. Your stomach swells. Your skin becomes papery and thin. You grow weak, unable to work, which means even less food. Eventually, your organs fail, or disease takes you because your body has no resources left to fight. Plague is the most feared killer, arriving without warning and claiming massive portions of the population. The symptoms are horrific. Fever, chills, vomiting, swollen lymph nodes called buboes that grow in the armpits and groin, blackened skin as tissue dies. The suffering is intense, and death often comes within days of the first symptoms. When plague strikes, social bonds dissolve. Families abandon sick members, fleeing to save themselves. The healthy refuse to care for the ill, terrified of contagion. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried, left in streets and homes, rotting, spreading the disease further. Entire villages are wiped out, the few survivors traumatized and broken. Those who die are the fortunate ones, in a sense. They're beyond pain, beyond hunger, beyond the relentless struggle of survival. For those left behind, life becomes even harder. Losing a parent means children must work harder, take on adult responsibilities years before they're ready. Losing a spouse means economic disaster, the struggle to survive now even more desperate. Funerals, when they happen, are simple affairs. The body is washed if possible, wrapped in a shroud, and carried to the churchyard. A grave is dug, shallow because the ground is hard and labor is exhausting. The priest says a few prayers, earth is shoveled over the body, and that's it. There's no coffin unless you're wealthy, no elaborate ceremony, no permanent marker. Within a generation, no one will remember exactly where you're buried. The churchyard itself is a crowded, unpleasant place. Graves are reused after a few years, the old bones dug up and placed in a charnel house to make room for new burials. The ground is uneven, marked by partially subsided graves and crooked wooden crosses that rot and fall over. In wet weather, it's muddy and foul-smelling, the scent of decay hanging heavy in the air. Your own death, when it comes, will likely be in the same bed where you've slept your entire adult life. If you're fortunate, you'll have warning, time to call a priest for last rites. He'll anoint you with oil, hear your final confession, offer communion. These rituals are meant to ease your passage to the afterlife, to give you a chance at heaven despite your sins. But often, death comes suddenly. A fever that escalates overnight, an injury that turns septic, a fall that breaks your neck. One moment you're alive, struggling through another day, and the next you're gone. Your family will grieve, briefly, but they can't afford to stop. There's work to be done, survival to ensure. They'll bury you, say some prayers, and move on, because in medieval Europe, death is too common to dwell on for long. Life expectancy is brutally short. If you make it to 40, you're considered old, a survivor. 50 is ancient. 60 is nearly unheard of. The average lifespan, when infant mortality is factored in, hovers around 30 to 35 years. Every day you live is a small victory against overwhelming odds. And yet, people continue. They marry, have children, plant crops, build homes, all while knowing that death could come at any moment. There's a fatalism to it, an acceptance born of necessity. You can't control when you'll die, can't prevent most diseases or accidents, so you simply live, and when death comes, you meet it as best you can. This is the medieval world, brutal, short, unforgiving. But it's your world, the only one you know, and you navigate it with whatever strength and resilience you can muster, until the day you can't anymore. Now let me shift to Catherine the Great's story, bringing the same gentle, sleep-inducing narration to her fascinating life. Far from the mud and misery of medieval peasant life, centuries later, in the glittering courts of 18th century Europe, another story unfolds. This one begins not with a crown, but with a clever young girl from an obscure German family who would become one of history's most powerful women. Born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, in the small Prussian town of Stettin, she entered a world vastly different from the one we just left, yet still shaped by rigid hierarchies and limited opportunities for women. Her father was a minor German prince, her mother an ambitious woman obsessed with social climbing. The family had a title but little wealth or influence, living in modest circumstances compared to the great courts of Europe. Sophie's childhood was strict and often cold. Her mother, Johanna, was demanding and critical. never quite satisfied with her daughter. She mocked Sophie's appearance, considered her not beautiful enough, not charming enough. This harsh treatment left scars, but it also forged something strong in the young girl. She learned to observe carefully, to understand what people wanted, to adapt and survive in environments where she wasn't particularly wanted. Education was Sophie's refuge. While most girls of her status received minimal schooling, focused on accomplishments like music and dancing, Sophie read voraciously. She learned languages, German, French, Russian eventually. She studied history, philosophy, and religion. Her tutors noticed her sharp intelligence, her ability to grasp complex concepts, her endless curiosity about the world beyond her small town. At 14, Sophie's life changed forever. The Russian Empress Elizabeth was seeking a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, her nephew and the future Tsar. Elizabeth wanted someone from a minor German family, someone who would be grateful for the opportunity, malleable, easy to control. Sophie fit the profile perfectly. The invitation came in 1744. Sophie and her mother were summoned to Russia to meet Peter and the Empress. It was an opportunity beyond anything Sophie had dreamed, a chance to escape her provincial life, to enter one of Europe's great courts, potentially to become an empress. Her mother saw it as the culmination of all her social climbing. Sophie saw it as an adventure, terrifying but thrilling. The journey to Russia was long and arduous, traveling through winter landscapes in uncomfortable carriages. When they finally arrived in St. Petersburg, Sophie was overwhelmed. The city was grand, built by Peter the Great on swampland, filled with palaces and churches, a capital designed to announce Russia's arrival as a European power. The Russian court was unlike anything Sophie had experienced. It was opulent, excessive, filled with intrigue and danger. Empress Elizabeth was intelligent but temperamental, capable of great generosity and sudden cruelty. Courtiers schemed constantly, alliances shifted overnight, and everyone watched everyone else, looking for advantage or vulnerability. Sophie met Peter, and it was not promising. He was 17, 2 years older than her, but emotionally immature. He was obsessed with military drills and toy soldiers, awkward in social situations, and openly contemptuous of Russia, preferring all things Prussian. Their first meeting was stiff and uncomfortable, neither particularly impressed with the other. But Sophie was pragmatic. This marriage was her path to security and status, perhaps eventually to power. She would make it work, whatever it took. She threw herself into becoming Russian, studying the language intensely, learning Orthodox prayers and rituals, observing court customs, and adopting them as her own. Her conversion to Russian Orthodoxy was a calculated but sincere move. She took the name Catherine, Ekaterina Alexeyevna, shedding her German identity and embracing her new homeland. The ceremony was public and symbolic, Catherine understanding that this was not just a religious conversion, but a political statement. She was no longer German Sophie. She was Russian Catherine. The marriage took place in 1745, a lavish ceremony in St. Petersburg with all the court in attendance. Catherine was 16, Peter 17. The wedding was magnificent, but the marriage itself was a disaster from the start. Peter showed little interest in his young bride, preferring to play with his toy soldiers and drink with his friends. Rumors suggested he was impotent or simply uninterested in women, though the truth was likely more complicated. Catherine found herself in a golden cage. She was a Grand Duchess, living in a palace, but she had no real power, no influence, and a husband who ignored her. The Empress watched her constantly, suspicious of any independent action. Catherine's mother, still in Russia and meddling in court politics, became a liability, eventually expelled from the country after angering Elizabeth with her scheming. Alone in a foreign court, married to a man who didn't want her, under the constant surveillance of an empress who could be capricious and cruel, Catherine could have withered. Instead, she began to learn to plan, to build the foundation for something remarkable. She read, constantly, voraciously. She devoured books on philosophy, politics, history. Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, the great thinkers of the Enlightenment became her companions. She couldn't change her circumstances yet, but she could prepare herself for the day when she might. She cultivated allies carefully. Military officers, courtiers, servants, she charmed them all, showing interest in their lives, remembering details, building networks of loyalty. Where Peter alienated people with his contempt for Russia and his childish behavior, Catherine won them over with her intelligence and genuine affection for her adopted homeland. And she waited. Years passed, nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching, preparing. She bore a son, Paul, in 1754, though there were whispers that Peter might not be the father. The boy was immediately taken from her by Empress Elizabeth, raised separately, a tool of state rather than a child she could mother. It was heartbreaking, but Catherine couldn't afford to show weakness. In 1762, everything changed. Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter ascended to the throne as Peter III. Finally, after 17 years of waiting, Catherine's husband was Tsar. But Peter's reign was a catastrophe from the beginning, and Catherine saw her opportunity approaching like a storm on the horizon. Peter III's reign lasted only 6 months, but in that brief time, he managed to alienate nearly everyone who mattered in Russia. He reversed Russia's position in the 7 Years' War, making peace with Prussia and abandoning hard-won gains, all because he idolized the Prussian king, Frederick the Great. The military, which had fought and died for those victories, was furious. He insulted the Orthodox Church, reducing its power and property, mocking its rituals in public. The clergy, immensely influential in Russia, turned against him. He offended the nobility with erratic policies and favoritism toward his German advisors. And he humiliated Catherine publicly, flaunting his mistress, threatening to divorce Catherine and marry his lover instead, even suggesting he might declare their son Paul illegitimate. Catherine watched all of this with careful attention. Peter was destroying himself, alienating every power base in Russia. The army was grumbling, the church was hostile, the nobility was alarmed, and even ordinary Russians, who knew little of court politics, sensed something was wrong with their new czar. Catherine began planning carefully. She had allies now, men she cultivated over the years. Gregory Orlov, her lover, was a charismatic military officer with brothers who commanded significant influence in the Imperial Guard, the elite units that protected St. Petersburg. These men were loyal to Catherine, impressed by her intelligence, her commitment to Russia, her strength of character. In July 1762, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine made her move. With the support of the Orlov brothers and other key military officers, she rode through St. Petersburg to the barracks of the Imperial Guard. She appeared before the soldiers in full regalia and declared herself the rightful ruler of Russia. The soldiers, who respected her and despised Peter, immediately pledged their allegiance. It was a bloodless coup, executed with precision and daring. Catherine rode through the city, gathering more and more supporters, until she controlled the capital. Peter, hearing the news, panicked. He had no loyal forces, no plan, no escape. Within days, he surrendered, signing abdication papers and placing himself at Catherine's mercy. Peter was taken into custody and held at a country estate. A week later, he was dead. The official story was illness, a sudden hemorrhoidal colic. But everyone knew the truth or suspected it. He'd been murdered, probably by Alexei Orlov, Gregory's brother, though whether on Catherine's orders or without them remains a historical mystery that has never been definitively solved. Catherine, at 33 years old, was now Empress of Russia, ruling in her own right. She had no legitimate claim to the throne by blood or law. She was a foreigner, a woman, a usurper. But she had the army's support, the nobility's grudging acceptance, and the intelligence to consolidate power quickly. Her first years as empress were crucial. She had to prove she could govern effectively, that she wasn't just a placeholder or figurehead. She threw herself into the work of ruling with an energy and dedication that surprised even her supporters. She rose early, worked late into the night, reading reports, issuing orders, meeting with advisors. Catherine styled herself as an enlightened despot, a philosopher queen who would modernize Russia and bring it fully into the European world. She corresponded with Voltaire, trading ideas about governance and philosophy. She invited Denis Diderot to Russia, purchasing his library and offering him a pension. These relationships were partly genuine intellectual engagement, partly shrewd public relations, showing Europe that Russia under Catherine was a civilized, progressive nation. In 1767, Catherine convened the Legislative Commission, an ambitious attempt to reform Russia's legal system. She drafted the nakaz, her instructions to the commission, a document heavily influenced by Enlightenment principles. It spoke of equality before the law, the abolition of torture, the importance of education, the responsibility of rulers to serve their people. It was radical for its time and place, these ideas suggesting limits on autocracy, rights for subjects. But Catherine was also pragmatic. Russia was a vast empire built on serfdom, the enslavement of millions of peasants to noble landowners. The nobility would never accept freeing the serfs, and Catherine needed their support to maintain power. So the nakaz spoke beautiful principles, while the reality of Russian serfdom continued, even expanded during her reign. This was Catherine's constant balancing act, the ideals she genuinely believed in versus the political realities of governing Russia. She wanted to be enlightened, progressive, a ruler who brought education and reason to her empire. But she also wanted to be secure, powerful, unchallenged. When those goals conflicted, pragmatism usually won. She reformed education, establishing schools and encouraging learning. She supported the arts, building theaters and galleries, importing European culture, while also celebrating Russian traditions. She modernized the administration, dividing Russia into provinces with more efficient governance. These were real achievements, tangible improvements to Russian society. But there was always the contradiction at the heart of her reign. While she spoke of human rights and enlightenment, she presided over a system where millions lived in bondage, where nobles had absolute power over their serfs, where peasants could be bought and sold like property. Catherine granted huge tracts of land and thousands of serfs to her favorites, rewarding loyalty and consolidating support among the aristocracy. She became a master of propaganda, controlling her image carefully. Portraits showed her as regal and beautiful, dressed in lavish gowns or military uniforms, projecting strength and authority. She wrote memoirs later in life, shaping the narrative of her rise to power, emphasizing her intelligence and determination while downplaying the more brutal aspects of her coup and reign. Catherine's personal life continued to raise eyebrows across Europe. She took lovers, openly, and without much pretense of secrecy. After the Orlov brothers, there was Grigory Potemkin, perhaps the love of her life. Their relationship was complex. Lovers, possibly secretly married, eventually close friends and political partners. Potemkin was brilliant and ambitious, and together they shaped Russia's expansion and modernization. Later lovers were younger, often much younger, handsome men who provided companionship and perhaps made Catherine feel youthful as she aged. Europe's courts gossiped endlessly about her sexual appetite, often exaggerating and inventing salacious details. After her death, her enemies spread the completely false and disgusting rumor about a horse, a vicious lie designed to destroy her reputation. But Catherine didn't care much about the gossip. She was Empress of Russia, one of the most powerful people in the world. Let them talk. She had an empire to expand and modernize. Catherine didn't just want to rule Russia. She wanted to expand it, to make it dominant in Europe and Asia. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched dramatically, adding hundreds of thousands of square miles and millions of new subjects. Her primary target was the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic power that controlled much of southeastern Europe and the Black Sea region. Russia fought two major wars against the Ottomans during Catherine's reign, in 1768 to 1774 and 1787 to 1792. These weren't just territorial conflicts. They were about access, trade, and Russia's status as a European power. Russian generals, like Alexander Suvorov, won stunning victories, defeating much larger Ottoman forces through superior tactics and determination. The Russian Navy, which barely existed at the start of Catherine's reign, grew into a formidable force, defeating Ottoman fleets and projecting power into the Mediterranean. The most significant gain was Crimea, the strategic peninsula jutting into the Black Sea. After years of military pressure and political maneuvering, Catherine annexed Crimea in 1783, giving Russia its long-desired warm-water ports and a foothold in the Black Sea. It was a triumph celebrated across Russia, marking the empire's arrival as a dominant regional power. Catherine's partner in these southern conquests was Potemkin, who governed the newly acquired territories. He founded cities, built ports, encouraged settlement, transforming what had been contested borderlands into productive Russian provinces. The famous Potemkin villages story that he built fake prosperous villages to impress Catherine during her tour of the region is likely exaggerated or false, but it shows how their partnership captured European imagination. While expanding south, Catherine also looked west, participating in the partitions of Poland. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was in decline, weakened by internal divisions and an ineffective government that required unanimous consent for decisions, making reform nearly impossible. Poland's neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, saw opportunity. In three partitions, 1772, 1793, and 1795, these powers carved up Poland among themselves until the nation ceased to exist entirely, wiped from the map. Russia gained the largest share, modern-day Belarus, Lithuania, and western Ukraine. It was cynical power politics, the strong devouring the weak, but it added vast territories to Catherine's empire. These expansions brought challenges. The new territories contained different peoples: Ukrainians, Poles, Crimean Tatars, Jews. They spoke different languages, practiced different religions, had different customs. Catherine tried various approaches, sometimes tolerant, allowing religious and cultural autonomy, sometimes assimilationist, promoting Russian language and Orthodox Christianity, always pragmatic, doing whatever seemed most likely to maintain stability and control. The empire was becoming increasingly diverse and difficult to govern. Catherine's vision of enlightened administration clashed with the reality of ruling such a vast, varied realm. She issued decrees from St. Petersburg, but enforcing them across thousands of miles of territory was another matter entirely. Despite these challenges, Catherine's military and diplomatic successes were undeniable. Russia was now a great power, feared and respected across Europe. The small German princess, who arrived in Russia decades earlier, had transformed the empire, making it larger and more influential than ever before. Her territorial ambitions were not about personal glory, but about Russia's status and security, ensuring it could defend itself and compete with other European powers. In 1773, Catherine faced the greatest internal threat of her reign, a massive peasant uprising led by a Cossack named Emelian Pugachev. This wasn't just another local rebellion. It was a movement that threatened the very foundations of her empire. Pugachev was a deserter from the Russian army, a charismatic leader who made an audacious claim. He was actually Peter III, Catherine's supposedly dead husband, miraculously survived and returned to reclaim his throne. It was obviously false. Peter was definitely dead, but to Russia's oppressed peasants and Cossacks, the truth mattered less than the hope this story offered. Pugachev promised liberation. He would abolish serfdom, lower taxes, give land to the peasants, punish the nobles who had enslaved them. These promises ignited a fire across the Volga region and the Urals. Thousands, then tens of thousands, joined his cause. Cossacks, old believers persecuted for their religious practices, serfs fleeing their masters, factory workers, all the marginalized and oppressed rallied to Pugachev's banner. The rebellion was brutal. Pugachev's forces captured fortresses and towns, executing nobles and officials, sometimes with shocking cruelty. They burned manor houses, freed serfs, and redistributed property. For a terrifying period, it seemed possible that the uprising might spread across all of Russia, that the entire social order might collapse. Catherine was genuinely frightened. This wasn't an external enemy or a court intrigue. This was her own people rising against her, against the system she ruled. She mobilized the army, sending professional military units to crush the rebellion. The soldiers, loyal to Catherine and terrified of what might happen if the serfs won, fought with determination. The rebellion was suppressed brutally. Pugachev's forces, poorly armed and trained, couldn't stand against regular army units. His allies began to desert or betray him, seeking pardons. In 1774, Pugachev was captured by his own followers and handed over to Catherine's forces. His punishment was designed to terrorize. Pugachev was brought to Moscow in an iron cage, displayed like an animal. He was publicly tortured and executed in Red Square, quartered alive, his body parts displayed as a warning. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who challenge the Empress. But the rebellion left scars. Catherine realized how fragile her power was, how much it depended on keeping the nobility loyal and the peasants controlled. Her Enlightenment dreams of gradually improving serfs' conditions evaporated. Instead, she tightened the system, granting nobles even more power over their serfs, ensuring their loyalty by protecting their privileges. The uprising showed the fundamental contradiction of Catherine's reign. She admired Enlightenment philosophy, believed in reason and progress, corresponded with liberal thinkers. But her power rested on a deeply unjust system, and when forced to choose between her ideals and her throne, she chose the throne every time. After Pugachev, Catherine became more conservative, more suspicious of change. Surveillance increased, censorship tightened, dissent was not tolerated. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, horrified her. The execution of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the chaos and violence, confirmed her worst fears about what happened when traditional authority was challenged. She who had seized power in a coup now defended monarchy and hierarchy fiercely. She who had corresponded with radical philosophers now banned their books and ideas. She had become the establishment, and she would protect it with all her considerable power. By the 1790s, Catherine the Great was in her 60s, a remarkable age for the time. She had ruled Russia for over 30 years, longer than most European monarchs. Her achievements were substantial. Russia was larger, wealthier, more powerful, more cultured than when she took the throne. She had founded the Hermitage Museum, one of the world's great art collections, housed in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. She had collected paintings, sculptures, books, creating a cultural treasure that would endure for centuries. She had built schools, promoted education, encouraged the arts and sciences. She had established smallpox inoculation in Russia, a medical innovation that was controversial and dangerous at the time. Catherine, showing remarkable courage, had herself inoculated publicly to demonstrate its safety, encouraging others to follow. This saved countless lives. Her court was magnificent, a center of culture and sophistication. Musicians, artists, writers, philosophers, they all sought patronage from the enlightened empress. St. Petersburg under Catherine became one of Europe's great capitals, rivaling Paris and Vienna in splendor and cultural achievement. But contradictions remained. For all her cultural achievements, Russia's peasants lived in bondage. For all her talk of enlightenment, she ruled as an absolute autocrat. For all her education reforms, the vast majority of Russians remained illiterate. Her legacy was complex, a mixture of genuine progress and deep injustice. Her personal life in these later years was quieter. Potemkin, her great love and partner, died in 1791. She grieved deeply, losing not just a lover, but her closest advisor and friend. Later favorites provided companionship, but nothing approaching what she had shared with Potemkin. Her relationship with her son Paul was terrible. She had never been allowed to raise him, and he had grown into a man she neither liked nor trusted. She worried he would undo her work, reverse her policies, perhaps even challenge the legitimacy of her reign by asking uncomfortable questions about his father's death. She considered bypassing him in the succession, giving the throne instead to her grandson Alexander, but never quite made it official. On November 16, 1796, Catherine suffered a stroke. She collapsed in her private chambers, was found by servants, and carried to her bed. She never regained consciousness, dying the next day at age 67. Her death was sudden, but not entirely unexpected. She had been in declining health, growing heavier and less active in recent years. Paul became emperor immediately, taking the throne his mother had tried to deny him. One of his first acts was to have Peter III's body exhumed and reburied with full honors next to Catherine's, a symbolic gesture suggesting that Peter had been the legitimate ruler and Catherine a usurper. It was petty revenge against a dead woman, but it showed how complicated Catherine's legacy was even in death. History remembers Catherine the Great, a title she never gave herself, as one of Russia's most significant rulers. She was not born to power, but seized it through intelligence, courage, and ruthless pragmatism. She was not Russian by birth, but became more Russian than many native-born nobles. She was a woman in a world that believed women couldn't rule, yet she ruled more effectively than most men who held thrones. Her life was a study in contradictions, enlightened but autocratic, progressive but conservative, idealistic but practical. She read philosophy, but ruled through power. She spoke of human rights while owning thousands of serfs. She promoted education while censoring dangerous ideas. She was complex, flawed, brilliant, and effective. In the end, Catherine succeeded because she understood power, how to get it, how to keep it, how to use it. She played the long game, planning decades ahead, building alliances, eliminating threats, always adapting to changing circumstances. She was a survivor who became a conqueror, a foreigner who became the embodiment of Russian power, a princess who became an empress and left her mark on history that endures to this day. Now we journey to a different world entirely, to the jungles of southern Mexico, where ancient pyramids rise above the rainforest canopy, remnants of the Maya civilization that flourished over 1,000 years ago. Among these ruins lies one of archaeology's most intriguing mysteries, the tomb of the Red Queen. In 1994, Mexican archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez and her team were excavating Temple 13 at Palenque, one of the great Maya cities of the Classic period. Temple 13 stood adjacent to the Temple of the Inscriptions, famous for containing the tomb of Quetzalcoatl Pacal, known as Pacal the Great, the most celebrated ruler of Palenque. Temple 13 was smaller, less imposing, and initially didn't seem particularly promising. But as the team carefully excavated, they discovered a sealed chamber that had never been disturbed by looters, a remarkable find in a region where tombs had been plundered for centuries. When they broke through the seal and entered the chamber, they found a stone sarcophagus. The air was heavy, unchanged for over 13 centuries. As they carefully opened the sarcophagus, brilliant red dust rose like smoke, filling the chamber with color. The entire interior was covered in powdered cinnabar, a mercury sulfide compound that created a vivid crimson coating. Lying within that red cloud were the skeletal remains of a woman, her bones stained red from the cinnabar. She had been buried with extraordinary care and reverence. Her skull wore a mask made of jade and shell pieces, carefully fitted to the contours of her face. Around her were jade necklaces, ear spools, rings, beads, hundreds of pieces of this precious green stone that the Maya valued more than gold. It was one of the richest female burials ever found in Mesoamerica, comparable in wealth and ceremony to Pakal's own tomb. Yet there were no inscriptions identifying her, no glyphs carved on the sarcophagus walls telling her story. She was a mystery, a woman clearly of the highest status, yet anonymous. The archaeologists named her the Red Queen, after the cinnabar that covered her. The name was poetic but frustrating, a placeholder for an identity they desperately wanted to uncover. Who was this woman? Why was she buried with such honor? What was her relationship to Pakal, whose tomb lay just meters away? The cinnabar itself was significant. This toxic red powder was one of the Maya's most sacred substances. Its brilliant color symbolized blood, life force, rebirth, the transformation from death to the next world. Covering a body in cinnabar was a ritual reserved for the most important individuals, a spiritual preparation for the journey through Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Only 2 burials at Palenque had been found with such extensive cinnabar coverage, Pakal the Great and the Red Queen. This parallel suggested a connection, perhaps the most important connection, husband and wife, partners in life and now in death. The tomb's location supported this theory. It was positioned immediately adjacent to Pakal's tomb, a deliberate placement that suggested pairing, equality, partnership. In Maya belief systems, balance was crucial, masculine and feminine, sun and moon, earth and sky. Burying them side by side might represent this cosmic balance made physical. The offerings around the Red Queen told stories even without words. Jade was not just valuable. It represented eternal life, the green of growing maize, the vitality of nature. Covering her in jade was a declaration of her importance, her divinity, her eternal status. There were bone needles, obsidian blades, shell ornaments, ceramic vessels that once held offerings of food or drink for her journey. Each item was chosen deliberately, part of a ritual system the Maya had developed over centuries to help the dead navigate the dangerous path to the afterlife. The Red Queen's burial wasn't just a funeral. It was a spiritual technology, a carefully constructed ritual designed to transform her from mortal to divine, to ensure her successful passage through Xibalba and her rebirth as an ancestor spirit who could help guide and protect her descendants. Modern science has been applied to the mystery. DNA testing, isotopic analysis, facial reconstruction, all attempted to identify the Red Queen definitively. The results have been frustrating and inconclusive. The DNA was too degraded to provide definitive matches. Isotopic analysis of her teeth suggested she grew up in the Palenque region, but couldn't pinpoint her identity. The strongest candidate remains Tizie Kbu, Pakel's principal wife. She was born into nobility, married Pakel young, bore at least 3 sons, who became important in Palenque's political hierarchy. She would have been queen consort, participating in rituals, wielding influence important enough to merit such an elaborate burial. But there are other possibilities. She could have been Sak-Kook, Pakel's mother, who ruled Palenque as queen before her son came of age. She could have been a sister, a daughter, a high priestess. Without inscriptions, certainty remains elusive. Some scholars suggest the absence of inscription was intentional, that the Red Queen's power was meant to be remembered through ritual and symbol rather than written words. In Maya cosmology, names had power, but so did silence, mystery, the unspoken. The Red Queen rests now in a museum, her bones carefully preserved, her jade treasures displayed. Visitors can see the reconstruction of her tomb, the brilliant red of the cinnabar, the delicate jade mask that once covered her face. She has become one of Palenque's most famous residents, her mystery part of her appeal. She represents something important, the recognition that Maya civilization included powerful women, that leadership and prestige weren't exclusively male. The grandeur of her burial proves she mattered, deeply and officially, in ways that shaped her society. In the quiet of the museum, she waits, this Red Queen, surrounded by her jade and cinnabar, still keeping her secrets after 13 centuries. Perhaps one day, new technology or a new discovery will finally tell us her name. Until then, she remains suspended between history and myth, a woman whose life was important enough to merit the richest burial, but whose identity remains lost to time. To understand the Red Queen and her world, we must understand Maya civilization at its height during the Classic period, roughly 250 to 900 CE. This was a time of great cities, complex politics, sophisticated art and writing, astronomical knowledge, and elaborate religious rituals. Palenque, where the Red Queen was buried, was one of the great Maya city-states, a regional power that controlled territory and tributary towns across the western Maya lowlands. The city was built into the foothills of the Chiapas Mountains, terraced into the slopes, with pyramids and palaces rising dramatically from the jungle. Maya's cities weren't unified empires, but independent kingdoms, each ruled by a Keahulajaw, a divine lord who served as both political leader and religious intermediary between humans and gods. These rulers weren't just kings. They were considered semi-divine, descended from gods, capable of communicating with the supernatural world through ritual and bloodletting. Women in Maya society held more power than in many ancient civilizations. Royal women participated in rituals, commissioned monuments, sometimes ruled in their own right or as regents. The most famous example from Palenque is Sakuk, who became ruler when male heirs weren't available, governing until her son Pakal came of age. The Maya writing system was sophisticated, combining logographic and syllabic elements to record their language fully. They carved their history, genealogies, and rituals on stone monuments called stelae, on temple walls, in painted books. Much of this writing was destroyed by Spanish conquistadors, who saw it as pagan and dangerous, but enough survived to allow modern scholars to read Maya glyphs and reconstruct their history. Religion permeated every aspect of Maya life. The cosmos was divided into layers: the heavens above, the earthly realm, and Xibalba below, a dangerous underworld that the dead had to navigate. Gods were numerous and complex, often having multiple aspects, controlling natural forces, agricultural cycles, warfare, and human fate. Ritual bloodletting was central to Maya religion. Rulers and nobles would pierce their tongues, earlobes, or genitals with stingray spines or obsidian blades, catching the blood on paper that was then burned. The rising smoke was believed to carry prayers to the gods and summon vision serpents through which ancestors could communicate. These rituals were public performances, conducted on pyramid tops before crowds of subjects. They demonstrated the ruler's piety, courage, and divine connection. A Kahulajaw who couldn't perform these painful rituals, who couldn't shed his blood for his people, would lose legitimacy and power. Women participated fully in these bloodletting rituals. Images on temple walls and pottery show royal women piercing their tongues, pulling thorn-studded ropes through the wounds, experiencing the same pain and achieving the same spiritual states as men. This wasn't seen as strange or inappropriate. It was expected, required, a demonstration of their divine status and spiritual power. The Red Queen, whoever she was, would have participated in such rituals. The bone needles found in her tomb might have been the very tools she used for bloodletting, sacred objects imbued with spiritual significance through years of use. They were buried with her so she could continue these practices in the afterlife, maintaining her connection to the divine even in death. Maya civilization valued complementary dualities: masculine and feminine, sun and moon, day and night, life and death. These weren't opposites in conflict, but necessary partners in balance. A healthy cosmos required both, working together in harmony. This philosophy extended to rulership, where queens complemented kings, feminine power balancing masculine, both necessary for proper governance and ritual effectiveness. Palenque's art, and architecture reflected these beliefs. Temple decorations showed rulers in elaborate costumes, surrounded by glyphs and images of gods, presenting themselves as cosmic centers holding together the layers of reality. Women appeared in these scenes alongside men, sometimes in their own right, demonstrating that feminine power was recognized and celebrated. The city itself was a cosmic map, pyramids representing sacred mountains where heaven and earth met, palaces serving as royal residences and ritual stages, ball courts where cosmic battles between gods and underworld lords were reenacted through sport. Every structure had meaning beyond its practical function, embedding religious symbolism into daily life. By the time the Red Queen died, probably in the late 7th or early 8th century, Palenque was at or near its peak. Pacal had ruled for decades, transforming the city, building monuments that proclaimed its greatness. The Red Queen's burial, so elaborate and expensive, was possible because Palenque was wealthy and powerful, able to afford such displays. But Maya's cities were always precarious. They depended on agriculture in a region with limited water sources, on trade networks that could be disrupted by warfare, on political stability that could collapse with a weak ruler. Within a couple centuries of the Red Queen's burial, Palenque would decline, its population dispersing, its buildings abandoned to the jungle. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, Palenque was already ancient ruins, its writing system forgotten, its stories lost. The Red Queen had already been sleeping in her cinnabar tomb for 800 years, her jade treasure safe in the darkness, her identity erased by time and the jungle's relentless growth. She remained hidden for another 500 years, until modern archaeologists rediscovered her, bringing her story, incomplete and mysterious, back into the light. Far from the ancient Maya world, in early 20th century Mexico, another remarkable woman's story was beginning. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in Culiacan, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. The house where she was born, La Casa Azul, the Blue House, would become central to her identity, a place she would leave and return to throughout her turbulent life. Frida's father, Guillermo Kahlo, was a photographer, German and Hungarian by ancestry, who had immigrated to Mexico and built a modest career taking photographs for the government. He was intellectual, reserved, suffering from epilepsy, a condition that made him vulnerable and sometimes dependent on his family. Her mother, Matilda Calderon, was deeply religious, of indigenous and Spanish descent, the daughter of a photographer. She was emotionally distant from Frida, strict and traditional, more concerned with propriety and religion than with nurturing her daughter's creativity. Frida was the third of 4 daughters, a middle child who learned early to fight for attention and recognition. She was imaginative and bold, telling stories, asking questions, refusing to accept the limitations placed on girls in early 20th century Mexico. When she was 6, disaster struck. Frida contracted polio, a disease that left her bedridden for 9 months and left her right leg permanently thinner and weaker than her left. The illness isolated her from other children, who mocked her limp and her appearance. Her father, perhaps drawing on his own experience with chronic illness, became her ally and champion. Guillermo encouraged Frida to exercise, to build strength despite her damaged leg. He taught her to box, to swim, to wrestle, activities considered inappropriate for girls. He also shared his love of art and philosophy, treating her as an intellectual equal, encouraging her curiosity and independence. Frida began hiding her thin leg under long skirts and trousers, developing a distinctive style that would later evolve into her iconic look. But the polio did more than damage her leg. It shaped her understanding of pain and difference, teaching her that bodies could betray you, that physical suffering was something to endure and overcome. At 15, Frida was accepted into the National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of only 35 girls among 2,000 students. It was a prestigious institution, and Frida thrived there intellectually and socially. She joined a group called the Cachuchas, young intellectuals who debated politics, philosophy, and art, who saw themselves as revolutionaries preparing to transform Mexico. Mexico in the 1920s was still recovering from its revolution, a decade-long conflict that had killed over 1 million people and transformed the country's politics and culture. The revolution celebrated indigenous heritage, questioned traditional hierarchies, promoted nationalism and social justice. Frida absorbed these ideas, developing a political consciousness that would shape her art and identity. She was planning to become a doctor, to heal and help people, a noble ambition for a young woman who had experienced illness and knew suffering. But fate, cruel and transformative, had other plans. On September 17, 1925, Frida and her boyfriend Alejandro Gomez Arias boarded a wooden bus after school. They were laughing, arguing playfully, completely ordinary until the moment the bus collided with a streetcar. The impact was catastrophic, crushing the bus, splintering wood, throwing passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail that entered her pelvis and exited through her abdomen. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places. Her collarbone broke. Her right leg shattered in 11 places. Her foot was crushed and dislocated. Her shoulder was wrenched from its socket. A bag of gold powder she'd been carrying exploded, covering her bloodied body in glittering dust, creating a surreal, horrific image witnesses would never forget. She was 18 years old, and her body was destroyed. Doctors didn't expect her to survive the first night. But Frida, stubborn and strong, held on. She endured surgery after surgery, weeks in a body cast, months of agonizing pain and uncertainty. Her dreams of medical school evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of learning whether she would walk again, whether she would ever live without pain. During the long months of recovery, flat on her back in the blue house, Frida began to paint. Her mother installed a special easel that could be positioned over the bed, and her father gave her paints and brushes. A mirror was attached to the canopy above her, so she could see herself, her only available subject during those immobile days. What emerged from that forced stillness was revolutionary. Frida didn't paint pretty pictures or conventional portraits. She painted her pain, her broken body, her damaged spine, her shattered dreams. She painted herself again and again, exploring her identity, her suffering, transforming trauma into art. These early paintings were small, intimate, painted on metal or wood panels in the style of Mexican retablos, devotional paintings that depicted miracles and suffering. But Frida's retablos were secular, personal, showing not saints and divine intervention, but her own body and psyche laid bare. She painted herself in a medical corset, her spine replaced by a broken column, nails piercing her flesh, tears streaming down her expressionless face. She painted her miscarriages, her surgeries, her loneliness, her longing. Nothing was hidden or softened. Her art was brutally honest, confronting viewers with realities they might prefer to ignore. Through painting, Frida found a new purpose. She couldn't be a doctor, but she could be an artist. She couldn't heal others' bodies, but she could express universal experiences of pain and survival through her own suffering. Her broken body became her subject, her canvas, her testimony. By the time she was 20, Frida had survived polio and a catastrophic accident, endured dozens of surgeries, and discovered her calling as an artist. She was scarred, in chronic pain, walking with a limp, but she was also strong, determined, and beginning to create art that would eventually make her one of the most recognized painters of the 20th century. But first, she would have to navigate love, loss, politics, and the complicated relationship with the man who would become the most important and destructive force in her life, Diego Rivera. In 1928, Frida Kahlo, still recovering from her accident but able to walk with a cane, decided to show her paintings to Mexico's most famous artist, Diego Rivera. He was 42, she was 21. He was massive, over 6 feet tall and weighing 300 pounds. A giant of Mexican muralism known for his politically charged frescoes depicting Mexican history and revolutionary ideals. Frida found him working on a mural at the Ministry of Education, perched on scaffolding high above the ground. She called up to him boldly, asking him to come down and look at her work. She wanted his honest opinion. Did she have talent, or was she wasting her time? Diego climbed down and examined her paintings carefully. He was struck immediately by their raw honesty, their uncompromising vision. These weren't imitations of popular styles or attempts to please viewers. They were deeply personal, technically skilled, emotionally powerful. He told her yes, she had talent, real talent, and she should keep painting. They began spending time together. Diego was fascinated by this young woman who refused to be intimidated by his fame or size, who argued with him about politics and art, who matched his intellectual intensity. Frida was drawn to his brilliance, his passion for Mexico and its people, his absolute commitment to his art, and his revolutionary ideals. Their courtship was unconventional. Diego was already famous for his affairs, his multiple marriages and divorces, his inability to remain faithful. Frida knew his reputation but didn't care. She wasn't looking for conventional romance or security. She wanted a partner who understood art, who shared her politics, who could match her intensity. They married on August 21st, 1929, at the town hall in Coacon. It was a small ceremony, almost casual. Frida wore traditional Mexican clothing, beginning the adoption of Tehuana dresses that would become her signature style. Her parents were skeptical, calling it a marriage between an elephant and a dove, worried that Diego would hurt their daughter, that the age and size difference was too great. They were right to worry, but not for the reasons they imagined. The marriage was passionate and creative, but also tumultuous and painful. Diego supported Frida's art, encouraged her development as a painter, introduced her to influential people in the art world. But he was also chronically unfaithful, sleeping with models, students, friends, even Frida's younger sister Cristina, a betrayal that nearly destroyed Frida. In 1930, Diego received commissions to paint murals in the United States, and Frida accompanied him to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. For Frida, a committed communist and Mexican nationalist, the United States was a revelation and a disappointment. She was fascinated by the industrial power, the skyscrapers and factories, but disgusted by the capitalism, the inequality, the way workers were exploited while the wealthy lived in obscene luxury. In Detroit, while Diego painted his famous Detroit industry murals celebrating the city's automobile factories, Frida became pregnant. She wanted the baby desperately, but her damaged body, her fractured pelvis, made pregnancy dangerous. On July 4, 1932, she miscarried, hemorrhaging badly, rushed to the hospital in agony. The loss devastated her. She painted her grief in Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself lying on a hospital bed, bleeding, connected by red ribbons to floating symbols, a fetus, a snail representing slow time, medical equipment, her shattered pelvis. It was graphic, surreal, heartbreaking, unlike anything in contemporary art. It was pure Frida, transforming her deepest pain into visual testimony. She would never successfully carry a pregnancy to term. Her body, broken in the bus accident, couldn't support a child. This loss, the inability to become a mother, haunted her throughout her life. She painted it again and again. Lost children, broken bodies, the devastating gap between desire and physical reality. When they returned to Mexico in 1933, Frida threw herself into politics and art. She and Diego built a house in San Angel actually two houses connected by a bridge, one for each of them, a physical representation of their relationship, together but separate, connected but independent. The house became a gathering place for artists, intellectuals, and revolutionaries. When Leon Trotsky arrived in Mexico in 1937, fleeing Stalin's Soviet Union and seeking asylum, Frida and Diego welcomed him into their home. Trotsky, the famous revolutionary theorist, lived in the Blue House for over 2 years, protected by Mexican hospitality and Frida's fierce political commitment. Rumors suggested Frida and Trotsky had an affair, a brief passionate connection between two intense personalities. Whether true or exaggerated, it represented Frida's growing independence from Diego, her willingness to take her own lovers in response to his infidelities. Diego's affair with Cristina, Frida's sister, was the breaking point. The betrayal was too deep, too personal. Frida cut her hair short, abandoned the feminine Tehuana dresses she'd worn to please Diego, and painted self-portrait with cropped hair, showing herself in a man's suit, surrounded by her cut braids, with lyrics written above. "Look, if I loved you, it was for your hair. Now that you're bald, I don't love you anymore." They divorced in 1939, a separation that seemed inevitable given Diego's behavior and Frida's pain. But they couldn't stay apart. Despite everything, they loved each other, needed each other in ways that transcended conventional relationship structures. They remarried in 1940, but on different terms. Frida insisted on financial independence, her own home, her own life. She would remain Frida Kahlo, not merely Diego's wife. This second marriage was less romantic but more sustainable. They lived separately much of the time, pursuing their own work and relationships, coming together when they wanted rather than from obligation. It wasn't traditional, but it worked for them. Two intensely creative people who needed both connection and freedom. During these years, Frida's art matured and deepened. She painted The Two Fridas, a double self-portrait showing two versions of herself sitting side by side, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in Tehuana clothing, strong and composed. The painting explored her divided identity, European and indigenous, wounded and whole, dependent and independent. She painted The Broken Column, perhaps her most powerful work, showing her torso split open, her spine replaced by a crumbling ionic column, her flesh pierced by nails, her face stoic despite the obvious agony. It was a portrait of chronic pain made visible, suffering that couldn't be hidden or denied. Her work was beginning to gain recognition beyond Mexico. In 1938, she had exhibited in New York, her first solo show with critical success. In 1939, she traveled to Paris, where she exhibited alongside surrealists and was praised by André Breton, who tried to claim her as one of their movement. Frida rejected the label. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Her art wasn't about exploring the unconscious or creating fantastical scenes. It was about depicting her lived experience, her pain, her body, her identity, her politics, all rendered with unflinching honesty. The 1940s brought both recognition and increasing physical decline. Frida's spine was deteriorating, the damage from the accident compounded by years of strain. She underwent surgery after surgery, doctors trying various interventions: bone grafts, spinal fusions, steel supports. Nothing provided lasting relief. She wore corsets, plaster, and leather contraptions designed to support her crumbling spine. She decorated them, painting them, turning medical devices into art objects. Some corsets had hammer and sickle symbols, political statements even in her suffering. Others had mirrors, flowers, personal symbols. She refused to be reduced to a medical case. Even her pain would be aestheticized, controlled, made meaningful through art. The pain was constant, relentless, wearing her down. She took medications, increasingly strong painkillers that brought their own problems: addiction, mental fog, physical deterioration. She drank heavily, tequila helping to numb both physical and emotional pain. Her body was failing, but her mind and her artistic vision remained sharp. Her paintings from this period reflected her suffering, but also her defiance. In The Wounded Deer, she painted herself as a deer pierced by 9 arrows, bleeding but still standing, still moving forward. The landscape around the deer was barren, offering no shelter or comfort, but the deer's eyes were clear and direct, refusing to surrender. She painted still lives, arrangements of fruit that seemed simple, but carried deeper meanings. Watermelons split open, their red flesh bleeding like wounds. Coconuts with faces watching. Fruit arranged like body parts, sensual and disturbing. Even these seemingly gentle subjects were infused with Frida's perspective. Life and death intertwined, beauty inseparable from decay. Her political commitment remained fierce. She joined the Mexican Communist Party officially, attending meetings, participating in demonstrations, using her art to promote revolutionary ideals. When her health allowed, she would appear at protests in her wheelchair, fist raised, voice strong, refusing to let her broken body silence her political voice. In 1953, Mexico finally gave Frida a solo exhibition, a celebration of her work in her home country. By this time, she was so ill that doctors forbade her from attending. Frida characteristically ignored them. She arrived at the gallery by ambulance, was carried in on a stretcher, and was placed in a 4-poster bed in the center of the exhibition space. Surrounded by her paintings, dressed in traditional Tehuana finery, her face painted carefully, Frida held court from her sickbed. Guests came to her, offering congratulations, discussing her work, celebrating her contribution to Mexican art. She drank tequila, told jokes, sang songs, showed no self-pity despite the obvious pain. It was performance and authenticity combined, Frida refusing to be diminished even as her body collapsed. That same year, her right leg, chronically infected for decades, had to be amputated below the knee. It was a devastating blow. Frida, who had fought so hard to overcome the polio-weakened leg, who had hidden her limp under long skirts, who had maintained her mobility despite constant pain, now lost the leg entirely. She was fitted with a prosthetic limb, which she decorated with a red leather boot embroidered with Chinese silk. Even the artificial leg that marked her disability, she would make beautiful, artistic, distinctly hers. But the amputation broke something in her spirit. Her diary entries from this time are darker, more despairing, questioning whether life was worth the unrelenting suffering. "Feet! What do I need them for if I have wings to fly?" she wrote, trying to maintain her defiance, her poetic vision. But other entries were bleak. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Diego was often away, absorbed in his work, maintaining his own studio in life. When he was with Frida, he was tender and devoted, but he couldn't be there all the time. Frida was often alone in the blue house, attended by nurses and friends, painting when she had strength, sleeping when the pain was too much, existing in a pharmaceutical haze of painkillers and alcohol. Her final paintings were among her most powerful. "Marxism will give health to the sick," showed Frida throwing away her crutches, supported instead by the hands of Karl Marx and revolutionary ideals. The earth split open behind her, symbols of capitalism and imperialism falling into the void. It was hopeful and desperate simultaneously, imagining a world where politics could heal what medicine couldn't. Her last known painting was a still life of watermelons, vibrant and alive, their red flesh gleaming. On one slice, she wrote, "Viva la vida!" Long live life. It was completed just days before her death, a final assertion of vitality in the face of approaching death, Frida's last defiant message to the world. On July 13, 1954, Frida Kahlo died in the Blue House, where she had been born 47 years earlier. The official cause was listed as pulmonary embolism, a blood clot in her lungs. But those close to her suspected the truth was more complicated. She had been in excruciating pain, taking massive doses of medications, drinking heavily. Some believed she had taken an overdose, intentional or accidental, that she had finally found the exit she had written about hoping for. Just days before her death, against medical advice, she had attended a political demonstration protesting the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. Friends had pushed her wheelchair through the streets, Frida's fist raised, her voice joining the chants against imperialism. Even dying, she remained committed to her political beliefs, refusing to be silenced. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's premier cultural institution, an honor reserved for the nation's most significant artists. Her body was draped in the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, a political statement that caused controversy, but perfectly represented Frida's uncompromising commitment to her ideals. Diego was devastated. "The death of Frida is the most tragic event in my life," he said. "Too late, I realized that the most wonderful part of my life had been my love for Frida." He was inconsolable, weeping openly, acknowledging that his infidelities and self-absorption had hurt the woman he loved most. According to her wishes, Frida's body was cremated. As the flames consumed her, witnesses reported that her body suddenly sat up in the intense heat, and her face appeared to smile. A final surreal moment from a woman whose life had blurred the boundaries between reality and dream, between suffering and art. After her death, Frida's reputation was initially overshadowed by Diego's fame. She was known primarily as Diego Rivera's wife, her own achievements minimized. Her paintings were owned by private collectors and friends, not prominently displayed in major museums. Her name was whispered in art circles, but not widely celebrated. But slowly, inexorably, Frida's star began to rise. Through the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars reclaimed forgotten women artists, Frida's work gained new attention. Her unflinching examination of female experience, her frank depiction of miscarriage, pain, and bodily reality resonated with women who had never seen their own experiences reflected in art. Her assertion of indigenous Mexican identity, her rejection of European aesthetic standards, her celebration of traditional clothing and culture made her an icon of cultural pride. Her refusal to hide her disability, her queerness, her unconventional marriage, her political radicalism, all became sources of inspiration for marginalized communities seeking representation. The Blue House became a museum in 1958, opened by Diego before his own death. Visitors could walk through Frida's bedroom, see her wheelchair and easel, her painted corsets, her collection of Tewana dresses, her four-poster bed with the mirror still attached to the canopy. The house preserved her presence, allowing people to connect with her life beyond just her paintings. Her face became iconic. The unibrow she refused to pluck, the direct gaze, the flowers woven into her hair, the traditional Mexican clothing. That face appeared on posters, t-shirts, murals, becoming one of the most recognized images in the world. Sometimes this commercialization felt like a betrayal of Frida's complexity, reducing her to a simplified symbol, but it also meant her image reached millions who might never visit a museum. Her paintings, once considered too personal or too graphic for mainstream appreciation, became treasured masterpieces. The Two Fridas hangs in the Museo de Arte Moderno in Mexico City, a national treasure. Other works are scattered in major museums worldwide, commanding enormous prices when they appear at auction. Frida's diary, published posthumously, revealed her inner thoughts, her poetry, her sketches, her pain. It was raw and unfiltered, filled with declarations of love for Diego, political statements, musings on death and suffering, colorful drawings that exploded across the pages. Reading it felt like entering her mind, seeing her thoughts without mediation. For queer communities, Frida became a symbol of sexual freedom and fluidity. Her affairs with both men and women, her refusal to conform to heterosexual norms, her celebration of desire in all its forms, made her an icon decades before mainstream society accepted such openness. She had lived authentically in an era that demanded secrecy, and her courage inspired others. For disabled artists and activists, Frida represented the transformation of pain into power. She hadn't hidden her disability or pretended her chronic pain didn't exist. She had made it central to her art, showing that suffering could be depicted with beauty and meaning, that disabled bodies deserved representation and celebration. For Mexicans, Frida embodied national pride. She had worn indigenous clothing, celebrated Mexican folk art, infused her work with pre-Columbian symbolism, and refused to abandon her homeland even when international success could have taken her elsewhere. She was deeply, authentically Mexican, and Mexico claimed her as a cultural treasure. Her relationship with Diego, once seen primarily through his perspective, was reevaluated. She wasn't just his wife or his muse. She was his equal, perhaps his superior as an artist, certainly more focused and disciplined. Their marriage was complicated and often painful, but it was also a partnership of two creative giants who understood each other in ways others couldn't. Today, Frida Kahlo's legacy extends far beyond painting. She's invoked in discussions of identity, pain, disability, queerness, feminism, colonialism, cultural appropriation. Her life and work raise questions about authenticity, suffering, art's purpose, the relationship between personal and political. Some criticize the commodification of her image, the way her face is slapped on products she would have despised, sold in capitalist marketplaces she opposed. Others argue that this widespread recognition, however imperfect, means her message reaches people who desperately need to see someone who looked different, suffered deeply, and created beauty anyway. In the end, Frida Kahlo succeeded in her deepest goal. She painted her reality so honestly, so powerfully, that it became universal. Her pain was specific to her broken body, but it spoke to anyone who had suffered. Her identity was rooted in Mexican culture, but it resonated with people everywhere seeking to define themselves authentically. Her politics were communist and revolutionary, but her insistence on human dignity and justice transcended ideology. She lived only 47 years, much of that time in terrible pain, and yet she created a body of work that will endure for centuries. She transformed her suffering into art, her disability into strength, her marginalization into iconography. She refused to be diminished, silenced, or forgotten. Frida Kahlo painted herself over and over, not from vanity but from necessity, creating a visual autobiography that documented her life, her pain, her love, her politics, her identity. In doing so, she gave voice to millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. When you see her face today, that direct gaze challenging you from posters and t-shirts and museum walls, remember, this was a woman who suffered enormously but refused to surrender, who loved passionately despite betrayal, who created fearlessly in the face of pain, who lived authentically when authenticity was dangerous. She painted her reality, and in doing so, she changed what was possible in art. She didn't just survive. She transformed survival into beauty, pain into meaning, life into something worth celebrating even when it brought unbearable suffering. Viva la vida! She wrote on those watermelons just before she died. Long live life. It was her final message, her ultimate defiance. Despite everything, life was worth living, worth celebrating, worth painting in brilliant, unflinching colors. And now, as we reach the end of our journey through these stories, through medieval suffering and imperial ambition, through ancient mysteries and modern pain, perhaps you're feeling the weight of sleep settling over you. These lives, so different from our own yet so recognizably human, remind us that people have always struggled, loved, endured, created. The medieval peasant working fields until their body broke. Catherine the Great transforming herself from a foreign princess into an empress. The Red Queen buried in cinnabar and mystery. Frida Kahlo painting her pain into beauty. All of them face circumstances we can barely imagine, yet all of them persevered. Their stories are over now, but they echo forward through time, reaching us here in the quiet darkness, reminding us of the resilience of the human spirit, the endless capacity for survival and creation even in the face of overwhelming odds. Rest now. Let these stories fade into dreams. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this moment, you can simply be, breathing softly, drifting peacefully, carried by the rhythm of history into sleep.